say something.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets! Hello everyone and welcome to day 13 of Terrorthon, a brief history of vampires. Some of you may remember from last year we did a video on the brief history of zombies. Vampires is a much murkier subject, it's not quite as clearly defined as the zombies, but we will certainly do our best. So, let's turn back the clock to before Christ. Did you know that the Hebrews, ancient Greeks, Romans and more believed in demons and spirits? Well, if you watched last year's then yeah, you did know. A runestone was discovered in 9th century Denmark with a grave binding inscription on it to prevent the body leaving the grave, so we can trace vampires at least back to then. But most historians agree that the mass phenomenon of vampires did not begin until the early 18th century in southeastern Europe, where the legend of the vampire was spread by word of mouth. Vampires in these days were believed to be the remnants of evil beings, witches or suicide victims, but vampires could also be created if you were bitten by another vampire. This resulted in mass hysteria throughout southeastern Europe and even public executions of suspected vampires. But here's where it gets murky. In 2015, in Poland, a 500-year-old body of a vampire was discovered with a stake in its leg, a rock in its mouth to prevent further blood sucking, and an iron rod through its chest. So, who do we believe? In 1734, the Oxford English Dictionary had an entry on vampires which read as follows: "These vampires are supposed to be the bodies of deceased persons, animated by evil spirits, which come out of the graves in the night time, suck the blood of many of the living, and thereby destroy them." Throughout the 18th century, tuberculosis claimed 2% of the New England population, and because tuberculosis resulted in coughing up blood, many people believed these were vampires. And then, in March 1892 in Rhode Island, corpses were exhumed, the corpses of Mary Brown and her daughters Mary Olive and Mercy Lena, because they believed they were vampires because the bodies were so well preserved. Their hearts were removed and then burned. And then multiple vampire sightings continued throughout the 18th and 19th century. Even government officials were participating in vampire hunts then. And now let's talk about vampires in fiction. So the first appearance of one was in The Vampire by John William Polidori. And then that same year, 1819, Lord Byron wrote A Fragment, which was an unfinished vampire story. In 1872, a book called In a Glass Darkly by Sheridan Le Fanu also contained vampires. And then the big one. In 1897, Bram Stoker released Dracula, the most influential vampire tome of all time. The title came from what Bram Stoker believed meant devil in Romanian. Then in 1922 we had the first vampire movie, Nosferatu, which we've discussed already. This was based on the novel by Bram Stoker, but they couldn't say that for legal reasons. We could do a whole video on the history of Nosferatu, it's a fascinating film. Then in 1931 we had the Bela Lugosi version of Dracula from the Golden Age of Horror. Then 1958 Hammer Horror released their version of Dracula starring the legend Christopher Lee. And somehow we got from there to Hold On Tight Spider Monkey. And that's it, a brief history of vampires. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you tomorrow.